you are listening to part 4 of the Nick and Joe Show for May the 12th. Thank you very much. Our guest tonight in the studio is Ron Gray. Not Ron Gray. Oh, man. I'm doing this crazy stuff lately, calling people that I know by the wrong name.
Rod Taylor.
I knew it was. Of course, it's Rod Taylor. Last week I was calling Nick Lynn, who's my wife, actually. So, yeah, how that happened, he has no idea. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So, as I said, Rod Taylor is our guest in the studio. Sorry about that, Rod.
No problem.
So it's been a very long day for me. I got to tell you. And then we're having a meeting here. I got to tell you guys this story, okay? We're having a meeting here over dinner, and I get a text saying I have to get on this conference call for 15 minutes. So I get on the conference call for 15 minutes, and the conference call is to tell me that I have to do a 7:30 in the morning conference call tomorrow morning. Have I had a chance to read the documents they've sent me yet? But of course, they've just sent me these documents, right? Like 5 minutes ago. So I'm going, I don't know, guys. I might sleep through that call. I don't know when I'm going to have a chance to read through all this material. Like I won't get at this until midnight. So, and I've been at it anyway. Okay, enough whining and complaining. So Rod is leader of the Christian Heritage Party, and we've been having quite a conversation about different issues and the Christian Heritage Party's position on some of these issues and Rod's personal views on a number of these issues. So welcome, segment number 4, and let's talk a little bit about. I think maybe let's talk a little bit about energy policy, Rod, because it's pretty critically important to the Canadian economy, and so what are some of your views on energy, and what kind of things would you like to see the government doing differently?
Well, Canada has the opportunity to have energy independence, and true energy independence. We have tremendous oil and gas reserves, including the oil sands, which are much maligned. But we've got coal and there's new processes for handling coal. But let's talk specifically about the oil sands and the fact that we are, currently still importing oil from, conflict oil from the Middle East to our eastern provinces, and we have our own oil in Alberta, which should be made available to all the provinces and should have access. That resource should be accessible for the whole province. We can talk maybe specifically about the Trans Mountain Pipeline and the failed Northern Gateway Pipeline proposal, the Keystone Pipeline, that now Biden has canceled that one. The Trans Mountain is sort of the freshest thing in our memory as far as government failure to get things happening in a timely manner. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about it, but I will say that one thing we would have done differently, not only than the current government, but maybe differently than the Harper government as well, when it comes to the export of the oil from the oil sands. We believe that there should have been an upgrader built in Alberta to take the raw bitumen, turn it into synthetic oil, and then that oil is much easier to ship by pipeline. Number one, we would keep jobs in Canada. With the upgrader, we would have more jobs in Alberta, and we would generate income for Canadians from our own resources. Secondly, it's easier to transport through the pipeline. Then you could have a refinery on the coast by Vancouver, which could then make different products out of it, and then ship the finished products abroad. There's also, even environmentally, it would have been a better choice, because if raw bitumen goes into a river if there's, God forbid, a spill or something, raw bitumen sinks to the bottom and is very difficult to clean up, whereas synthetic oil is kept more to the surface, is much easier to deal with if you should have a spill. But we think it's possible. with double-line pipelines and so on to prevent spills. And this resource is something that Canadians should be proud of, should be happy we have. It should not be maligned as it has been in the Liberal press and so on. Other forms of energy, I think, in Ontario particularly, there's, we've followed this fake science regarding carbon and so on. And so some of these wind farms that have been developed at great expense and sometimes at a greater environmental degradation than simply using oil and gas. It's tragic. We sort of know some of the history down there in southern Ontario where the wind farms have been imposed, sometimes against local community feeling and sentiment. But this idea that carbon is the enemy of mankind and enemy of the planet is simply a false notion. The science does not support the idea that carbon is the cause of global warming. Some people say that, or climate change as the newer terminology. But there's little evidence of that, and something that would be very difficult to prove anyway. But carbon dioxide is not a toxin. Carbon dioxide is good for plants. It's good for the environment. We depend on it. So does our environment. Now there are other emissions that come out of the processing, the refining of oil, and so on. And we would share the concern about those emissions. Man-made chemicals, poorly combusted. Off gassing and so on. We've seen some of the flares in Alberta. Yes, there's more that needs to be done, but to reject the oil and gas industry on this false notion that carbon is a terrible pollutant is simply a wrong way to go. Canada needs the oil. You can't really fly an airplane on solar power or wind power. You're going to have to use oil and gas anyway. We should be looking into some of, not necessarily current nuclear technology, but there is other types of technology that should be investigated for the breakdown of radioactive materials. Thorium, for instance, is one that shows some promise and might be quite beneficial to pursue. We have always supported alternate energy sources as well, and we think that where it's practical to employ wind, waves, and solar. I mean, there is, but it shouldn't be a religious conviction that we do things that don't make sense in order to placate those who are so antagonistic to carbon. So.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned about carbon not being a pollution, and of course it's not. Should turn my own mic on there. You mentioned carbon not being a pollution, and of course it's not. But what people, one of my pet peeves, Rod, is the lack of basic education that people have these days coming out of forget about university, forget about college, high school, okay? And anybody that's taken a decent high school course understands that all life on our planet is carbon-based. When the oil that it's extracted from the earth is the result of the degradation, if you will, of living material, forests that existed X number of years ago. And when the trees die and eventually become covered over, etc., that oil is a byproduct of their the demise of that plant life. Point being, you yourself, we as human beings, are pollutants or are pollution by virtue of the fact that our whole physical existence is carbon-based.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't get the, and I think this is part of the problem is, and I know this is not a federal issue, so it's something that you might have a personal opinion on, as some of your I'm sure many of your members do, and that. But I don't know how much you want to veer into education, but certainly this has been a very big problem for us in the Western world. The abandonment of basic educational standards, where it's become so easy now for people to have the wool pulled over their eyes because they don't know any better. They don't know any different. I don't know. I'm just shooting my mouth off
sure. I mean, education, of course. I mean, I've involved both provincially and federally. I'm involved with the BC provincial wing, but education is something that I think affects all Canadians, and we have kind of gravitated to some very low standards. Young people are not, and of course this is not universal. There's great teachers in many places, but the whole focus of education has become quite different. Our ability to teach history properly and our focus on proper history has faded. Our grammar and literature, those types of things have faded. Meanwhile, kids are being instructed and indoctrinated in, gender confusion ideology, the whole climate change thing. If anything, they're being turned into activists on both those issues. And I think we can actually look at the climate change hysteria that has gripped the planet for some time has now been somewhat replaced by the COVID hysteria. And some people feel, and I think they're not far off, that the left needs some kind of fear, a crisis of fear, that to motivate people to do things that they otherwise would not do. And that involves money, it involves taxes, it involves freedom, and there's a whole lot of issues. But young people in school, first of all, they should be learning reading, writing, and arithmetic, those skills, history, geography, business skills, even trade skills. They do not need to be indoctrinated in kind of a left-wing, feminist, Marxist, LGBT agenda. They should be being instructed in the things that will make them useful and productive citizens in Canada. And they can think about all those things, read about them, draw their own conclusions, but to have public school teachers indoctrinating them. Sometimes even the teacher is not in favor of the curriculum, but is being compelled to do so by, provincial dictates or whatever. So it's a provincial issue, but where we think the federal government ought to step in, we believe the primary goal of any government, federal, provincial, municipal, is to protect its citizens from harm. And when we see young children being indoctrinated in things that are going to affect their lives in a negative way, we think that it's not wrong for the federal government to express an opinion. Of course, this government will express the wrong opinion, our current government, but we would like to be at a place where we can put forward kind of the noble virtues that has made Canada, highly esteemed around the world, and which we've been losing in recent decades.
What's the next step? What is the next? You're in town, first of all, for the March for Life.
Yes.
Which is an annual march on Parliament Hill tomorrow.
Yep.
So what's the next chapter? What's the next step for the Christian Heritage Party?
Well, we are in the process of selecting and training candidates for the next election, whenever that will be. We kind of think it will be this fall, but even if it's put off till next year or whatever, an election will come eventually. And I know many of your listeners probably are very keen to see this Trudeau government be put out to pasture, as we are ourselves. Unfortunately, the O'Toole kind of the impact of Mr. O'Toole on his party has not been a positive one. Certainly for social conservatives, he's expressed himself. He hasn't even kept it quiet. He's shown that he doesn't support any pro-life initiatives whatsoever. He's kind of supportive of this C6 thing. He has basically expressed himself as not